Disasters are an unfortunate part of life. Most are localized, but every once in a while a disaster strikes on a scale that's so big that it's hard to wrap your head around. But now with modern technologies, specifically Google Earth and historical satellite photos, we can start to appreciate the scale and intensity of some of these disasters just a little bit more, oftentimes in a way that isn't really possible with other pictures or video. Take this imagery of the Taum Sauk Dam Collapse in Missouri, for example. When the upper dam burst, 1 billion gallons of water came cascading down the side of the mountain. The release of the water tore a path down the side of the mountain so big it can be seen from outer space, and so intense that even 20 years later it's still clearly visible. While terrifying, thankfully no one was killed in this incident. Unfortunately, that's not the case for the rest of these. On a spring day in 2011, the small Midwestern town of Joplin would be changed forever. Intense storms were rolling through the area late on the afternoon of May 22nd. Just after 5:30 p.m., a tornado formed west of downtown Joplin. Even by Tornado Alley's standards, this was a bad one. It quickly intensified to an EF5 tornado with winds estimated at over 200 miles per hour. The tornado touched down on the west side of town and cut a path of devastation due east through the city. Only a half hour after this terrifying act of nature started, it was over. But in its wake, 160 people were dead, over 4,000 buildings were destroyed, and several $1 billion in damage had been done. Right now we're looking at Joplin, Missouri. This image is from February 2011. Now if we skip ahead, you can see the impact that the tornado had and how much of a direct hit it was on the city of Joplin. But from this elevation, that started out around 35,000 feet, now as we zoom in, you can start to see really how bad it actually was. This is the beginning of the path of the tornado, and you can just see entire streets and houses devastated. Going to jump back before the tornado. Now we go ahead, and that's all that's left. You got trees ripped from the ground, you got houses flattened, and unfortunately, things got worse as it traveled into the densest part of downtown. Over here you can see where some of the most catastrophic damage was. Again, I'm going to jump back just to show what it looked like before. Houses, neighborhoods, trees, all that. And then you skip ahead and it's just complete devastation. You have a school that was damaged beyond repair. Again, jumping back to what it looked like before. And then this is what it looked like after. Basically started at the city limits and ended at the city limits on the other side. This is where it finished up around this highway down here. The other crazy thing to note with this is, so this is 2011, and then the rebuild was actually fairly impressive. This is about 2 years later, you zoom in, and obviously you can still see the path, but there's quite a few new homes, there's quite a few new businesses. As you zoom further ahead, same thing, more and more homes popping up, which is pretty impressive for a place like Joplin that it wasn't a super wealthy town to begin with. It did obviously get a lot in the form of, insurance payouts and donations and things like that. But there's places that have suffered a lot smaller issues than this tornado and that haven't really been able to repair. But Joplin, to their credit, they repaired, and the city's actually bigger now than it was prior to the tornado. The Maui Wildfires, ignited in August 2023, became one of Hawaii's worst natural disasters ever. Strong winds from Hurricane Dora intensified the fires unbelievably quickly. The fires, which were primarily centered in Lahaina, claimed the lives of over 100 people. Over 2,200 structures were destroyed, and damage estimates reached $6 billion. The historic town of Lahaina was left unrecognizable, and thousands of residents were displaced. The fires burned over 2,000 acres in Lahaina alone. And this is Lahaina before the fires came through. They started up this hill and they came down the mountain, propelled by winds of close to 100 miles an hour. Now, right now, we're looking at the town in June of 2022 before the fires. And unfortunately, you can see the devastating impact that the fires had. These areas that were once bustling, thriving neighborhoods with beautiful houses and pools and things like that were just completely burned to the ground. And the devastating impact, it didn't affect just one street or one block or one neighborhood, but it extended throughout basically the whole city, all the way down to the ocean. So as you can see, this is the before, and then this is after the fires. The fires went pretty far north as well, so this is another section of town that, again, before it was a thriving neighborhood with lots of houses, and then after, unfortunately, most of the houses were burned to the ground. It's interesting to note about wildfires is that they can be kind of sporadic. I think some people have the image of a wall of flames coming through, and in some cases that is exactly what happens, but in other cases you can have places like this where you have some buildings that are completely unscathed and then other ones that are burned to the ground. One of the big points of contention with the wildfires in Maui has been the rebuild process. Some people are saying it's not happening quickly enough, and this, you can kind of see what's going on. In 2024, the sites started being cleared. There's a lot of cleared sites, not so much in the way of rebuilding, but 2025, as it's rolled around, there is starting to be some rebuilding. You can see construction sites throughout the neighborhood, so that's good to see. It's definitely going to take a while. It was a devastating incident, so it's expected that it would take some time to rebuild. In the summer of 2020, a fire broke out in a warehouse in the Lebanese city of Beirut. Firefighters rushed to the scene to extinguish the blaze, but when they got there, they realized they were up against something they had never faced before. The fire was unusually intense and making strange noises. What they didn't know at the time was that the warehouse was full of fireworks and several thousand tons of ammonium nitrate that had been confiscated almost a decade before. 20 minutes after the fire initially broke out, there was a massive explosion, equivalent to around 2.5 tons of TNT. Unfortunately, though, this was just the beginning. 30 seconds after this initial explosion, a much, much larger explosion took place. An explosion that would be considered one of the largest non-nuclear man-made detonations of all time. The explosion ripped through the city, killing 218 people and injuring over 7,000 others. Property damage was estimated at over $15 billion. Now we're in Beirut, near the port where the explosion took place. I'm zooming in on the warehouse in question, and this is just before the explosion. Now if I click ahead, you can see not only did the warehouse get flattened, but the ground that it was standing on doesn't even exist anymore. That's how intense the explosion was. And then if you zoom out and you start looking at the rest of the port area and the warehouses nearby, a lot of them were completely devastated by the blast. And to get a feel for really the scale of how big this area of damage was, you have to go back and see how small the trucks look and see even smaller the cars look. And then you zoom ahead and it's just complete devastation in every direction. And even across the water, there's areas that were warehouses that were in good shape before, and then you zoom ahead and just absolutely devastated by the explosion. The January 2025 wildfires near Malibu and Pacific Palisades were exacerbated by extreme Santa Ana winds and severe drought, and rapidly burned over 25,000 acres before eventually being contained by days of intense firefighting. The blaze destroyed 7,000 structures and damaged thousands more, devastating coastal neighborhoods and landmarks along the Pacific Coast Highway. Over 100,000 residents were evacuated, and the combined death toll from the Pallisades and Eaton fire reached 24. Right now we're looking at some of the neighborhoods that were affected most dramatically by the California wildfires of 2025. Rustic Canyon, Pacific Palisades, Sunset Mesa up here, they were all absolutely devastated. This image is from about 10 years before the fire. As you can see, very dense neighborhoods, lots of nice houses. You skip ahead to after the fire, and it's just complete and utter devastation. Entire neighborhoods burned down. Like I mentioned with the other fire, it's not just a couple blocks. Each one of these rectangles is a house that burned down. And you can see there's an awful lot of rectangles. And this is just in one neighborhood. As you scroll over to other neighborhoods, like the Pacific Palisades, same exact thing. You go back 10 years, beautiful houses everywhere, and then you go into the present day, and it's just devastation. And unfortunately, this goes on further up the beach. Sunset Mesa, same thing. Hundreds of homes that used to be very nice beachfront homes, and then now many of them that were burned down. On January 25, 2019, the Brumadihno Tailings Dam at an iron ore mine in Brazil collapsed, releasing 12 million cubic yards of toxic mining waste. The mudflow engulfed the mine's administrative area, including, unfortunately, a cafeteria during lunchtime. The mudflow destroyed homes, farms, inns, and a railway bridge. At least 270 people were killed, with some sources reporting more fatalities. The disaster caused severe environmental damage, contaminating a nearby river and devastating nearby communities. This is a tailings dam where some of the mining waste, some of what had been dug up was dumped in this area, and then this up in the front was a dam to hold it back. And unfortunately, in 2019, that dam failed, and a cascade of mud came through and took out everything in its path. And this is one of those ones where you can't really understand the scale until you start to zoom in, and you zoom in, and you zoom in, and you realize these little specks right here are big pieces of mining equipment. And if you've ever seen mining equipment, you know that it's not just normal excavators and normal trucks. It's heavy-duty stuff. So if this is this small, and then you start to zoom out and you see the scale of the collapse and the mud flow, it's pretty remarkable. Now I'm going to go back prior to the incident. This is where it all came from. And then this dam broke, and then it took out basically everything downstream from it. And like down here, you have, it went into a neighboring community. Luckily, it didn't go too far into it because that could have been even more catastrophic, but you can see all the debris and all the houses and mining equipment and everything else that got caught up in it. It's also interesting to see how far the mud flow went. This is quite a distance. If I just use a measuring tool real quick to get an idea of how far, if you start at the collapse to get to the river, this is about 5 miles. So even at 5 miles, you were still talking about a mud flow that was big enough to take out houses, like these ones right here, unfortunately. Go back before the incident, and there's these houses right here. You go after, and a lot of them have been washed away in the mud flow. There's a saying that one death is a tragedy, but 1 million is a statistic. The first 5 disasters on this list were unquestionably devastating on a massive scale, but they were still relatively localized incidents. These next 4, however, are truly on a scale that, even with the benefit of satellite imagery, are hard to really appreciate the scale. In August of 2025, Hurricane Katrina, a Category 3 storm, made landfall along the U.S. Gulf Coast. It resulted in catastrophic damage to Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. The storm's winds reached up to 140 miles per hour, and combined with an unprecedented storm surge, resulted in one of the worst natural disasters in American history. Official casualty figures vary, but it's widely reported to have caused around 1,500 deaths, with hundreds of thousands more displaced from their homes. The economic cost is estimated around $150 billion, making it the costliest hurricane on record in the U.S. The most severe storm impact occurred in New Orleans, where 80% of the city was submerged due to catastrophic flooding after the storm surge overwhelmed the levee system. Over 53 breaches in the city's flood protection barrier led to widespread inundation and hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses being destroyed or severely damaged. The flooding was not only due to the hurricane's force, but also engineering failures in the federally built levee system. Multiple investigations concluded that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who was responsible for designing and maintaining the levees, was at fault for the breaches, which caused 2/3 of the flooding, according to a 2007 report by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Right now, we're 40,000 feet up over New Orleans just after Hurricane Katrina came through. And as you can see, you can actually see the floodwaters running into the city. It's a pretty interesting snapshot in time because you can actually see the motion of the water coming into the city. Now, right now, we're over top of the lower 9th Ward, which was considered one of the hardest hit places. But if you scroll back out, you can see that really almost the whole city received some degree of flooding, even way back away from the Mississippi River and away from Lake Pontchartrain. And that is because the city is sort of a bowl with a lot of it below sea level. So once the floodwaters started running in, they really had nowhere to go, so it just started filling up. As you can see, This may look like canals, some of those Florida cities that have the canals, but this is actually downtown, and just every street is flooded. Kind of zoom back out, go back towards the lower Ninth Ward, and another shocking thing is how long things stayed flooded. Because it's like a bowl, there wasn't really much opportunity for things to drain. Eventually they drained and things cleared out, but here we are a week, 2 weeks after the hurricane, and much of the city is still flooded. We're going to skip ahead. Now, this is October 2005, so this is more than a month after the hurricane, and you still have large sections of the lower Ninth Ward that are still underwater. I'm going to zoom back out and show one more thing down here. This eastern part of the city was hit pretty hard, and if we go back to where things were flooded, zoom in on this section specifically, and even after the floodwaters receded, it caused so much damage that much of the area was just cleared off. On March 11th, 2011, a magnitude 9 earthquake struck off the northeastern coast of Japan, generating one of the most devastating tsunamis in modern history. The quake only lasted 6 minutes, but it triggered a tsunami that reached heights of 100 feet and surged inland as far as 6 miles in some areas. The tsunami arrived at the coast within 30 minutes of the earthquake, overwhelming seawalls and sweeping away entire towns. Official figures report nearly 20,000 deaths, 2,500 missing, and around 6,000 injured. The disaster completely destroyed 125,000 buildings, with around 300,000 being considered as half destroyed and another 750,000 severely damaged. The tsunami flooded around 200 square miles of land, obliterating coastal communities and vast areas of farmland. Close to 500,000 people were evacuated from their homes at the peak of the crisis, and many remained displaced for years. The catastrophe also caused the Fukushima nuclear disaster, as the tsunami disabled cooling systems at the power plant, leading to meltdowns in 3 reactors and a long-term nuclear emergency. The event resulted in direct economic losses exceeding $360 billion, making it one of the costliest natural disasters ever recorded. Right now we're looking at a Japanese coastal city just before the tsunami. If we go forward a little bit until just after the tsunami, you can see how much of the coast was inundated with floodwaters. It's totally unrecognizable. There's entire cities and towns that have been wiped off and flooded. There's farmers' fields that have been flooded. And this continues on for miles and miles. Here's another town that was totally wrecked. If this is before, and then now this is after. If you zoom in, you can see the debris and all the houses that have been ripped from their foundations. The beach line looks totally different than it did before, just a couple months earlier. Now, if we go further, same thing continues. And the thing with this tsunami, like some of the later ones on this list, is just how widespread the damage was. This goes on for hundreds of miles down the coastline. So it wasn't just one town or one city. It was dozens or hundreds of towns and cities. It affected millions of people. And it's just wild to see how any one of these places, this kind of devastation would be, any one screenshot like this would be complete and utter devastation. But there's hundreds of miles of this. And just as far as you can keep scrolling up the coast, you see more of this. And it's one of those things that it gets worse. The more you zoom in, you realize that each one of these is a little field or house or neighborhood, and then you go forward and it's just completely gone. On January 12, 2010, the already struggling country of Haiti was devastated by a catastrophic magnitude 7 earthquake, with its epicenter located around 10 miles southwest of the capital, Port-au-Prince. The earthquake lasted only a few seconds, but it caused unbelievable destruction across the most densely populated region of the country. According to official estimates, the earthquake killed between 200,000 and 300,000 people, with 300,000 more injured and 1.5 million displaced. The death toll remains a subject of debate, but it's widely recognized as the deadliest natural disaster of the 21st century for a single nation. Although it pales in compared to the human tragedy, the impact on the city's infrastructure was catastrophic. Close to 100,000 buildings were destroyed, with 200,000 more severely damaged, with some sources citing even higher numbers. Major landmarks, including the Presidential Palace, the National Assembly Building, and the Port-au-Prince Cathedral, were either destroyed or heavily damaged. Nearly 4,000 schools and numerous health facilities were destroyed or damaged, crippling education and healthcare systems. We are currently over top of Port-au-Prince, the capital city of Haiti, before the earthquake. This is 2008, but now if we skip ahead to January 2010, this is pretty crazy because the scope of it is just insane. The whole city was devastated. You can see these buildings that have collapsed. If we go back before, you can see what it looked like before and then what it looked like after. And with this one, it's hard to zoom in on one particular place because pretty much the whole city was devastated with hundreds of thousands of buildings destroyed or damaged. But one of the things that's most incredible that to me is this image is actually from the day of the earthquake. And as you can see, there's all these little dots in the street, and that's people obviously displaced from all the buildings collapsing and things like that. And it's fairly insane because you start to realize the magnitude of the incident when you start to see that basically every street looks like that. There's people everywhere just because they have no place to go. Every building just about became uninhabitable in a period of 30 seconds. You zoom in, you can see what I'm talking about, and this is like this across the entire city, every direction, just people in the streets everywhere, and buildings collapsed everywhere. I'm going to zoom back. This is prior to the earthquake, and then we skip ahead. This is now after, and as you can see, there's debris and rubble and collapsed buildings everywhere. And then, like I said, perhaps most shockingly is just the extent of the people in the streets as a result of the earthquake. I'm going to zoom back out. Another thing, this is kind of an extension of that, but you'll notice if you start to skip forward, this is the day of the earthquake, but if you start to skip forward, you'll start seeing lots and lots of blue tents popping up in anywhere where there was green space. And that's a lot of the disaster relief tents that people essentially had to live in for months or in some cases years. These places, this is what I'm talking about. So this was all open green space. It looked like it was parks and sports fields and things like that this is prior to the earthquake. This was July of the previous year. And then now if we skip to, you can see it's starting to fill up after the earthquake, but it just fills up and fills up. Now we're into May of the year of the earthquake. And you can just see that it's thousands of people living in this park. But this isn't an isolated phenomenon to this one park. You scroll back out and you can start to see these tent cities that popped up, and you can tell by the color where it's blue and white tents that in places that were previously parks and open space. This now is before, as you can see, this was a soccer field, and then you go to after, and now this is where thousands of people are forced to live. And like I said, this isn't isolated to one place. You can tell where these things popped up by the uniform color, whereas the existing areas don't have that sort of uniform color and shape and size. As you can see, it was open space, and then after the earthquake, it fills up with tents. And here's one, all along here is a section of tent city. Down here is one, down here is one. It's crazy how you can see from right now we're 15,000 feet up, and you can tell where the tent cities are because of the blue and white tents. And unfortunately, this would go on for years. Some of these tent cities lasted for several years while things were being rebuilt and while people were finding alternate arrangements, places to live. But like I said, with this one, it's just crazy the scale and how it doesn't really matter what section of the city you're in. You have these tent cities popping up as a result of all the damage that was caused to all the homes. Here's another one. Here's another one. Estimates put the number displaced at around 1.5 million. And finally, we have what's probably the most deadly of all the disasters on this list, and that's unfortunately the ongoing war in Ukraine. No one really knows the actual death toll, but it's certainly in the hundreds of thousands, and depending on who you listen to, it's likely crept up into the millions. For this last one, we're headed to Mariupol in Ukraine. This is one of the heavily fought over places in the war. Interestingly, they only provide imagery up to 2022. I'm not sure if that's something that's done intentionally or not, but so this is it before the war started. As you can see, it was a heavy industrial area. It was a port city. There was a lot going on. It was a very, very large city. Then you skip ahead to after the war. And again, this is only May 2022, so this is only a few months after the war started. And in those few months, it's complete and utter devastation. Again, jump back to prior, you had all these industrial facilities, warehouses, steel plants, things like that. And then you go skip ahead after the war started. This is only 3 months after the war started, and it's complete devastation. You have all these facilities are ruined. You have all these buildings. It's kind of hard sometimes to see collapses on satellite imagery, but if this is what it looked like before, and then this is what it looked like after. Basically, anytime you can see the rooms from the top of the building, it means the building is destroyed beyond repair. At the very least, the roof has been ripped off, but in a lot of cases, it means there's been some sort of collapse. And as you can see, this goes on for miles in every direction. And this is just one city along one section of the 1,000-kilometer front line. And this, again, it goes on. These neighborhoods were once healthy neighborhoods with houses, people living in them, and then now they're just completely devastated. And then if you zoom out, you can see more of it. Unfortunately, it's the same story across the whole city. Again, I keep going back to it, but this is only 3 months after the war started, and it's now 3 years after the war started. And this is just one city. So if you extrapolate this kind of damage across the front line, it's just pretty horrifying. And knowing that it was all driven by bad human decisions. And this is kind of interesting. This is 3/13/22, so this is right at the beginning, and you can actually see some of the fires burning of the first missile strikes and the first bombs being dropped. And if you zoom back out, you can see fires across the city, all over the place. And then again, zoom forward, and you can some of the parts of the city got it worse than others, but again, this is still just 3 months in, so presumably it looks a heck of a lot worse than it does here. But even here, 3 months in, you got these whole sections of houses just destroyed, houses that were once nice houses, and then just completely destroyed. Zoom back out, and unfortunately, like I said, the Google Earth doesn't seem to show much. I was looking for Bakhmut and some of the other places that have seen really intense fighting because I was curious to see what it looked like. But it's pretty limited. I'm sure there's somewhere you can get that type of imagery, but just standard Google Earth isn't showing it. But again, you can just see like how bad everything is. And again, I just keep saying it, but it's one section of the front line, one section of one city. Another thing that's fascinating in a fairly horrifying way is to see all the bomb craters and missile craters and mortar craters. Right here, this section apparently was being fought over at some point in time, and each one of these is some kind of explosive. You go back to before, and it was basically just swampland with road running through it, a railway running through it, and then you go to now, and it's explosion craters everywhere. So it looks like a train track was bombed or something, and then you go further down here, you have bridges that were taken out. Here's a bomb crater. I measured this one. It's almost 100 feet across, which is fairly insane, and then you see how many of them there are. It's really just terrible stuff.